What's up? No, I'm not turning up the music. We're starting. All right. We got 23 people on here. It's a good turnout, finally. Glad to see it. Let's see. Checking how long the delay is here. Seems to be quite a while. That seems more than 7 seconds tonight. Why is that? It is taking a long time to switch over. You can hear me, but can you see me? Because I'm not seeing me on the stream. Do you see me, or do you see my stupid stream starting soon thing? Really? Hold on. That's super weird. Hang on. Let me go to the actual live stream then. Okay, that's really weird. Hang on. I do want to go to the... There we go. All right. Got it. It was a little bit funky, but I figured it out. All right. I look pretty today. Great. Thanks for that. Just what I needed. Okay. So, British India. So we want to talk about kind of where we last talked about India and then why it matters so much for the AP exam and global history generally. So there is a broader study called post-colonialism. And what this basically is after World War I and World War II, some in the middle, some after, most after, European powers with a bunch of colonies, like the British and the French, begin to decolonize. And what that basically means is they get the hell out of their various colonies. Now, for the most part, they're doing this because the colonies are doing two separate things at the same time. One, they're a political nightmare. The idea that in a post-Hitler world and in a Stalin world, that a European power, or a Western power, could even be America too, is sitting there and saying to the world, Hitler was bad, Stalin is bad, look at the bad stuff they did, while also subjugating native peoples around the world to your rule, absent their ability to do anything about it, and certainly absent their consent. That's a big deal, right? Because that basically sets the whole situation up to be, well, who are you to tell anybody about morality when you are doing X? That's a real serious and reasonable argument, okay? Now, the British, we'll use them as their major example because they are the major example. The British 100% engage in the kind of conversation of, well, we've brought so much good to the world that although we recognize people's desire to be free and have their own nations, it's not like we were entirely bad for the people we ruled. And to give them their due, that's true. Like, without a doubt, they raised up the standard of living in a place like India, as an example, dramatically from what it was prior to their arrival. Even basic infrastructure that didn't exist before the British now exists because of the British. Things like railroads, just as an example. So there's no doubt at all that some of that is definitely true. This makes colonialism and imperialism a very, very, very difficult subject to study because it is not clear. It is not easy, and it is not simple. And like most things in history, if you try to actually narrow things down to what is simple, easy, and clearly defined, you're going to end up with a simplistic argument that doesn't go anywhere. That's why we have theses. That's why we have to make argumentation, because the purpose of an argument is that there may be more than one point of view. If something's a fact, there's no reason to argue about it. If someone wants to argue with the facts, they're an idiot. Let them argue with the facts. Ignore them. When there is actual room for debate in what may or may not be an outcome or an outlook or whatever, those are the places where you really need to sort of buckle down and have that nuanced conversation. And British India is a good example of that. So what we're going to talk about is where we were. Where we were was the Sepoy Mutiny. 1857? 67? I often forget myself. Let me double check, see if I'm going to put my money on 1867. British, 1857. I was off by a decade. 1857. The Sepoy Mutiny breaks out, which does effectively two things. One, it requires the British to come in as a military. Not the British East India Company, but the British military. To put down the rebellion and brutalize and capture and execute any sepoys that were caught up in the rebellion. From that point forward, you have rule of a thing called the British Raj. So I'm going to go and put myself down into the corner here. And here we go. So the British Raj. So this range of dates here, I'm going to zoom in on it. I would not ignore, you don't need to know the dates, but I would not ignore this overall concept here. British India, East India Company, company rule, British rule in, ignore that part really, the British Raj, and then partition of India. Those would be sort of the big ones. So you want to talk about the big three. The company ruling India is 1757. The 100 years to basically the day they rule India as a company. And then you've got the Sepoy Mutiny, which does two major things. One, disbands the company. The British government looks at the British East India Company as a failure. You have absolutely dropped the ball. I remind you, the British East India Company has also been responsible now for basically starting an opium war. Now, it wasn't really exactly them, but they were certainly the ones behind the opium drive for the first opium war. Okay, the second one has yet to happen. But the first opium war has already happened at this point, by 1858. So the British East India Company hasn't done a whole lot other than create a lot of headaches for the British government. Yes, they've been profitable, but the profit's been for themselves. It's not so clear, in fact, that having a colony is, in fact, a profitable thing to do. So the British take over kind of out of necessity, and they disband the monopoly of the British East India Company, effectively ending the company in any realistic way. So it's been a good run, boys, but you're basically done. From that point forward is this thing called the British Raj. The word Raj just basically means kingdom, okay? Like, for example, a Maharaja or a Raja are rulership titles in India. A Raja is a king. A Maharaja is the king of kings. So it's like an imperial title kind of thing. So the British Raj, the word Raj just means kingdom. And it's just a way of signifying an era where the British will directly rule India as a government with actual government officials from India in the country running the damn thing. So this, for example, would imply things like having an a British viceroy in the country to handle all affairs, or the actual British Army station there. Would the sepoys of the British East India Company become subsumed by the British military, and now so sepoys that are working for a private company are now sepoys working for the British military. And this becomes the India of the British Raj's beginnings, where the government of Britain takes over following the Opium War. Following the Sepoy Rebellion. And from 1858 until, let's say, 1910, this will continue on. Resistance to the British East India, the British Raj, the British government during that era is really very light. In general, the British set up two forms of rule in the country, and you can actually see it pretty easily on this map. So, in the reddish, pinkish color, okay, you've got the areas of Britain that were directly controlled. The areas of India were directly controlled by Britain. These are the ones where British officials ran the show. Like, this is it. And you could see that interwoven in all this are these yellow areas. These were what the British called the princely states. These were vassals of the British government. They were allowed to keep their own rule. In some cases, they were like confederations, like a bunch of princes ruling different chunks of the region together. And they were allowed to rule their own states as long as they followed British policy, paid British taxes, honored British trade regulations, and so on. In other words, you played nice with us in the past, and the reward for that is we don't run you. But you answer to us in all ways. That was basically the deal. And we talked about how in the earlier days, the East India Company would, for example, back ruler A over ruler B and some old conflict in order to garner favor with ruler A and control their finances. This is essentially the same situation. So that's where we are in terms of the rulership situation. And that will continue until roughly World War I. Now, if you go to World War I, and we will, you'll find British India, World War I, propaganda. As World War I approaches, and I'm hoping to get some good stuff here and not a bunch of crap. As World War One approaches, the British begin to rely upon, and you can see it here, their empire as a source of soldiers. I remind you, most people in Europe expected the conflict of World War One. Most did not expect it to be a drag-on war that would last for years and cost more lives than any conflict had ever costed. So, the basic idea was the British began to realize they need to have, and you can look at these posters in the back, I'll zoom in a little bit just so you can see them a bit better. The idea was pretty simple. They needed the citizens of their empire, despite the fact that they had no issue, no interest, and no nothing to do with the problems of Europe. They don't know who or what an archduke is. Was this common in imperialist countries during this time, like the use of imperialized people? Yes, it was common. The British were certainly the most prolific of this, but the French would do it too, with their North African, Algerian troops and things like that. But it was certainly most prolific amongst the British. The British almost always did this. Now, you might ask yourself, why in the hell would anybody in India be willing to go along with this? I mean, you see it yourself here. Follow in the footsteps of dear old dad. Here's Britain, the Lion, Canada, and let's go back there. India, Australia, and South Africa. We'll come to South Africa probably on later in the week on Thursday. But you'll see this idea, like, why would you do this? Like, what would make an Indian person go, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go fight on behalf of the British in some godforsaken trench in Europe. Why would you do this? And the answer is, well, you wouldn't do it. So what would make it happen? Well, what made it happen is the British go to the Indians that are really kind of the leading voices. Now, we have to talk about some of these groups right now. So one of them is called the Indian National Congress, okay? The Indian National Congress is a very important part of this ongoing story. For one, they are still there, so we have to be a little bit cautious about that. But I want you to note the founding date. This is 1885. So this is, right around the time when the British are starting to go into into Africa with the rest of the Europeans. The Indian National Congress is formed in India. And the idea was that they were going to be basically a nationalist political movement. I want to be clear. They're not a Congress. They're not creating any laws. They're doing nothing of the sort. The idea, though, is they're a political movement. And their basic goal is simple. Indian independence from Britain. It doesn't start that way. It starts with this idea that we do, as Indians, recognize that you, Britain, as our colonial overlord, have taken control of us absent our consent. At the same time, that was indeed ages ago. I mean, quite literally hundreds of years ago, all right? And you could see that it was founded not so long after the Sepoy Mutiny. It's only about 20 years after the Sepoy Mutiny. So, 30 years, I guess. So, that's still fresh in these guys' minds. And a lot of these people would have been alive for the Sepoy Mutiny. And so now you have the British government in charge, and these guys are forming as basically an anti-colonialist movement that believes in the concept of Indian nationalism. Now, what does nationalism mean? I don't want to give nationalism a bad rap. It has led to some bad stuff in other parts of the course, like your Nazi movement, your fascists, your Bolsheviks, and so on. But nationalism just means that people want to be ruled by themselves. That's really what it means. So if you're an independent nation, like in India is an independent group of people, you want your imperial overlords out. If you're a subjugated people, like for example, you are the Serbians under the rule of the Austrians, you want away from your Austrian rulers and you want your own country. This is a common trend in human history. People have nationalistic tendencies. What is going on in Gaza right now is ultimately a war over nationalism. The Israeli government and the Israeli population that supports the war, which is a large majority. Many want the hostages back, but they support the war in overwhelming numbers. They are nationalists in that they want to have a sovereign state of Israel for Jewish people culturally and religiously. Likewise, the movement of Gazans is that they want their own state for their own ethnic cultural group that they call Palestinian Arabs. So you've got the same tensions. All right, nationalism is a theme that just goes through the entire course. No, that's not true. Since Napoleon, it goes through the entire course. Napoleon and the French Revolution really captured the idea of having a nation, that you're on the team with the rest of us, and if the team wins, if the nation wins, you're somehow winning as an individual. It's a very, very, very new notion. So, the Indian National Congress is formed at this time, and they become kind of the leading voice of India's resistance to British rule. And the British are suddenly in a massive pickle in World War One. And they go to them and they go, look, man, we really, really need you to get behind the idea of encouraging Indian soldiers that we have here in India to be willing to go to Europe and fight in those trenches. Now, yes, these Indians were soldiers of the British government. These Indian sepoys, you know, if I look at, for example, Indian soldier in trench World War One. Like, I'm not making this up. I don't need to make it up. There they are. These poor schmucks are in Gallipoli. Gallipoli was in Italy. All right, it was a fight in Italy. Here's more guys, Indian soldiers, in the trenches. You know, you can see here, these guys are probably Sikhs. You can tell by their headdresses. Serving as units, serving, you know, I don't know, that's like an old colored, that's a colored image, you know, after the fact. But you can see an Indian dude back there with this, you know, what looks to be a Scotsman here. So this is, here's the original. So, I mean, this is, you know, my point is that you see it. I mean, I'm not making it up. I don't need to make it up. These guys were fighting in Europe, in trenches. And this presented a real challenge because, for one, I remind you of this. Hinduism has a real cultural taboo about dying too far from India. It has to do with reincarnation if you're a Hindu, and this idea that if you're too far from the Ganges River, your soul may actually linger and be unable to be resurrected or reincarnated into a new form if it can't find its way back to the Ganges. It's a spiritual concern, but there's a taboo about overseas travel for Indians and dying potentially in overseas travel. So that was definitely a concern. Another major concern is, well, why are we fighting for these people that we don't like and against these people we know nothing about and have no grudge with, right? I mean, imagine that, right? If you were an American soldier and they said, go to Ukraine and fight the Russians, do you care that much to fight Russian soldiers? I doubt it, honestly. What the hell would you care? So why would they do this? Well, the idea is that the British knew that they would be very resistant to doing this. And you don't want to bring troops to a battleground, into an area, and that don't want to go. They might mutiny on the ships as they come over. They might resist orders. They might elect not to fight very hard. They might be quick to run from a battle in order to save their own skins. So the British were very concerned about this. So what the British do is they go to the Indian National Congress, and they say, listen, as a nationalist group opposing us, we have opposed ideals. However, it is in the interest of this colony that we win World War One. If we don't win World War One, we have news for you. The people who are going to take you over are way worse than us. Now, this wasn't Hitler. This is the World War One Germans. And that was sort of the sales pitch. And that, of course, wasn't good enough. The Indian National Congress is like, yeah, you're one white guy amongst a bunch of other white guys. What do we care? You're all no good for our purposes. You're all trying to rule us. So the British have to sweeten the pot. And what they say is, they say, okay, you guys want independence. We won't give you independence, but we will seriously and significantly reform the leadership of the colony, effectively promising to make the Indian National Congress, which again at this point is not a congress of anything, it's just a political party, but give them actual political power in the country, an actual reform of the colonial power to make a place where Indians and British rule jointly. This was the promise. That's a sweet deal. And under that promise, the Indian National Congress agrees to support the war effort. And they speak out about this. They support the propaganda. They join in speeches about it's important that we support our British friends, etc., etc. And I'm looking for here. Did you know that India supplies all the jute for making sacks and sandbags, that more than half Britain's needs of livestock come from India, as well as tea, rice, hide, skin, cotton, and manganese? These are the sinews of war, the empire's strength. Now, this is a World War II poster, because as you're going to find, they didn't keep the promise. World War I ends, the British win, but there's so much kind of angst over what happens in Europe. It is not a very long process between World War I and World War II really kicking off. And in that process, the Indian leadership, the Indian National Congress, quite rightly says, hey, you promised us X, Y, and Z, and we didn't get it. And now the war's over, you won, and we didn't get it. And the British turn around and they basically have the attitude of, well, we can't give it to you, we're broke now. See, that became the concern. After World War I, the British were not willing to keep their deal because their fear was, if we keep this deal, we put Britain in a position where without its Indian profits and Indian wealth, the whole nation might collapse. There was serious fears of socialism, serious fears of growing communist revolts. Remember, the communist revolution in Russia had happened mid-World War I. So the British looked at the whole situation like, we did promise, we do keep our word, but it's going to have to wait. It's like your mom and dad say to you, oh, we'll do this, I'll get you this, I'll get you that, and they don't come through. And they go, no, it's coming, you just have to wait. And of course, eventually the question becomes, well, how long do I have to wait? And why do I have to wait? And what the hell, am I waiting for exactly? And the British are able to more or less placate things for a while, not completely. So, for example, there are these other issues. For instance, British atrocities. There we go. It was already there for me. In India. They don't have them by date. Hold on. List of massacres in India. Here we go. So, these are not all British, but colonial India, okay? If we move past company rule, just to show you. So, the war is in 1914 to 1919, right? 1918. In 1919, the British Raj ordered a unit of British Indian Army to open fire on a large meeting taking place contrary to the orders posted by various people. They had lynchings, rapes, arsons, and intimidations of the local people by anti-colonial protesters. Another rebellion occurs in 1921. There was an attempt to create like a Muslim Shia movement in India, basically, and it fails. 1922. There's another massacre. 1924. There's the tensions immediate. Calcutta riots. A Muslim mob attacked the Hindu possession, later broken up by a mounted police charge and the Muslim rioters. And on and on. I want you to see that this is not a calm period. You don't need to know any one of these specific problems. What you need to know is in that post-World War I period, there is a significant amount of violence on a fairly ongoing basis. Now, World War I is going to begin, for simplicity's sake, we'll call it 37-38, when Hitler invades Poland, okay? And the British turn right around and once again need help. Now they need even more troops. They need even more help. And so we now have British World War II propaganda. And you get stuff like this. It's the same logic as the last poster I showed you, right? The little line leading the charge, right? So now you got all the British possessions. Help us out, help us out, help us out. And we're going to stomp on the Japanese. We're going to stomp on the Germans. This was it. You get stuff, like this is Japan trying to propagandize against the British by, having these posters distributed in India secretly against British rule. You got stuff like this Indian lion here. This is a good one, actually. Here, this is a bunch of just propaganda. This one's fun. So, a leaflet depicting an Indian elephant, where it's throwing or has the British Empire in its grasp. This guy is John Bull. John Bull is like Uncle Sam, but for the British. Just kind of showing that there was these propaganda where you had this sort of stuff going on. Now, at the same time, they are desperate for that help, and they do get it. Now, this brings us to some of the more important figures in the movement. So let's talk about 3 men in this Indian independence movement that are happening while these wars are ongoing. 3 very important figures. We'll do them in rough order that you probably are likely to come across them in your life. The first one is Mohandas Gandhi. So Mohandas is his name. Mahatma is a title he later gets. I'm in the way, aren't I? Hold on. There. So you know this guy. You've seen him before. Bald dude in a diaper, right? You've seen this guy before. Gandhi is the spiritual's the word, but it's not the word I want to use. He is the symbolic heart of the Indian independence movement. He's a great leading man to be the guy who is the face of Indian independence. However, he's not the political face of it, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So he's theoretically a part of the Indian National Congress. Like that's who he's eventually a part of. But he actually starts his life as an Indian-born upper-class man who his parents are able to afford to send him to school in England. And here he is, pre-diaper, as a young man and a law student in London, where he learned and became a barrister. A barrister is a lawyer. And in there, a couple of things happen. For one, he was treated very well. He says this in his own writings and speeches, that in England, he was treated, as he felt, like a British citizen. The fact that he was a brown-skinned man of India with an Indian accent never really seemed to be a problem. In fact, he made a lot of effort to become English, adopt English custom, adopt English clothing style, as you could see there. He wanted to become a part of British citizenry and British culture. And he was treated, according to his own words, in England quite well. And he eventually does become a lawyer. And as a junior lawyer, he gets hired by a law firm, and the law firm decides that the best place to sort of assign him would be to South Africa. Now, why South Africa? At the time, South Africa is a British colony. And so if we kind of zoom down, here we go. Very famous story where he books a first-class ticket on a train in South Africa. These are like, you'd book ahead of time like you would anywhere else. Like even in those days, you book your fares ahead of time. So he books a first-class ticket. Why? He's a lawyer. He's got money, comes from money. He's not going to travel with the riffraff, right? It's like, if you got a bunch of money, of course you fly first class if it's no big deal to afford it, right? So yeah, that's all. He buys a first-class ticket. When he goes to get on the train, for the first time really in his adult life, he experiences real discrimination. It's different than, well, you're just an Indian guy and we're dudes in England who are white, and that's a difference. He always said, and in fact, the line is even here, and I think this is a real critical sort of thing. He thought of himself as a member of the British Empire. He was a Briton. Yes, he was Indian-born, but he was a Briton. And that's important, right? Because if you think about it like in America as an example, we're all kinds of different stuff, We discussed today how Ray Tang's a Sicilian, right? But do you think of yourself as a Sicilian, as a French, as an Italian, as a German, or are you an American first? Like, we say Italian American, Irish American. What if you're an American German? Right? In other words, how do you view your identity? Are you an American first, and your cultural practices, your food, the fact I talk with my hands all the time? People say you conduct a great choir on YouTube because I'm constantly talking with my hands. My hands are flying through the camera all the time. If you put on music, it's like I'm conducting a choir. But that's a culture thing. Where I grew up, everybody talked with their hands. Everybody talked with my accent. It was culture, right? Do I view myself as my cultural tendencies first, or am I an American first? And Gandhi absolutely viewed himself as a British first, and that his Indian heritage was a secondary thing. And he actually cultivated that. He wanted that to be the situation. So one of the things he did was when he goes to board this train, he is refused access to first class, despite the fact of having a ticket, and despite being a member of the British legal system. He's a lawyer, so this is like this is an important position. This is a man who has good earnings, but he looks at it and he books this ticket, and he should have his ticket honored, and he never ever once thought that it wouldn't be. And the colonial administration of the trains in South Africa, run by the British government at the time, turn around and flat out tell him, you're not white, and therefore you can't ride first class. I don't care what ticket you have. And this wasn't one racist sort of train conductor. This was the whole system of the state. As we'll talk about on Thursday, South Africa was an apartheid state where literally your racial condition, I'll call it, dictated your rights. And so Gandhi was suddenly struck by the fact that this is not really what he experienced being a British, or a Briton as he called it, his whole life. He was now being treated like an Indian very much first, instead of his British heritage or his British cultural attitudes. And what was worse, not only was he being treated this way, but he was actually living the reality of colonial Britain. And this is something Gandhi very quickly picks up on. And his biggest strength was his astute awareness of how British culture works. So his strength was that he had been educated in Britain. And not that he knew the law, although he did know the law because he was a lawyer, but that he knew how British people think. And because he wanted to think like them, and be like them, and act like them, he had adopted the way they think. And the truth was simple, and Gandhi knew this from early days. In Britain, the British felt, the average man on the street felt, that in their colonies, Britain treated people the way people were treated in Britain. In other words, I say to you, he left England very happy with his time in school, his education, his friends, and so on. But when he got to South Africa, for the first time in his life, really, he is experiencing the systematic oppression of the colonized people of the region. And he is not treated as British, he's treated as something else. And he starts to realize that British justice only applies in Britain itself. If you go to Britain's colonies, it is not the same. You are a lesser creature, a second-class citizen, and those rules no longer equally apply. And so this leads him eventually back home to his own country of India, where he chooses a new life of giving up of law for the British and British companies and becoming a member of the Indian National Congress as somebody who wanted to see the independence of India, the reforms of India, and to call light to this problem. Now, Gandhi's methods were what make him extraordinary. So Gandhi's most famous... I want to find some stuff for it to help you. Not that. This is it. The non-cooperation movement. Now, this has a lot of links to today's stuff, but I also want to sort of make sure we don't go too far. So why did the guy who looks like this and looks like this then decide to go look like this? Like, why'd he do that? Voluntarily. Because he's a genius. What he realized is the world of 1919, 1920, 1921 was a world of photography and was a world even of early film. So he knew that if he could make the cause of Indian independence in newspapers and media that would make their way back to England, that he could demonstrate in photos, he could demonstrate in unrefutable terms the nature of the treatment of India as a colony by its British masters. Something that the British people themselves did not recognize. You may recall we talked about the Belgian Congo, where Leopold was having his colonial administrators hack off the hands and feet of colonial black Africans that were not producing enough rubber. And we also talked about how when that came to light, the opinion in Belgium was that this was a horrific abuse of human rights. They did not applaud this. They found it to be disgusting. So that's important. Gandhi knew this. He's an aware man. And he understands that if they can turn British opinion, that's how you get independence. You have to turn the opinion of the average British citizen. You have to show the suffering. You have to show the injustice. And he said the way to do that is to make actual injustice obvious. And so he creates the idea of the non-cooperation movement. And what the non-cooperation movement was is pretty straightforward. You simply don't comply with the law. Now, it does not mean you violently refuse it. In fact, his chief principle was peaceful protest. He invented the idea, frankly, of a peaceful protest movement that would demonstrate the brutality of your oppressors. Okay? Like, let's use as a sort of a comparison point the Israel-Gaza thing going on. What makes Israel-Gaza complex is that both sides engage in horrific violence. That's what makes it complex. If, for example, Hamas did not exist and there was no terrorist activity, attacks, or anything like it versus Israel, and Israel engaged in a land war to wipe out Gaza or Gazans or whatever they think their leadership is, Israel would look unconscionably like a horrific power brutalizing a small population. What complicates that narrative is that that small population has within it extremely dedicated, fatalistic, and terroristic fighters who are more than willing to see their own die, and as well as civilian lives on either side die, for what the cause that they have is. So if Hamas has in its charter, its constitution, and it does, that its stated goal is the destruction of Israel and the extinction of the Jews as a people, that is not ignorable. So you can't just say, well, poor Gaza, when its governmental leadership has literally as a policy that it will wipe out all Jews. And that complicates, well, is what Israel doing too much or okay or not enough? Or it's hard because your enemy is vowed to wipe you out. What Gandhi understood was the right way to show something as brutal is to be the direct opposite of that. Don't fight back. Don't fight back. They punch you, they hit you, they beat you with a stick, they brutalize you. You must not fight back. And the reason Gandhi understood the power of this is, look, if you start beating up this guy, I mean, look at him. He looks like E.T. If you start beating up on E.T., you're not going to really look like a sympathetic figure. You look like a horrific bully. So this guy choosing to dress in what is effectively poverty clothes, letting himself lose more and more and more weight, often through hunger strikes. In fact, threatening to not eat until he died, starve himself to death in protest of certain British actions, really put the British in a bad spot. Because what are you going to do? You're going to beat up the bald man in the diaper? Now, having said that, he had a number of followers, and he was able to convince a great many of them that this was, in fact, the right way. However, there were lots of other people in India who did not feel this way, who felt like this kind of thing would not lead to swift enough change. And they were violent, and they were people willing to engage in violence to get the change they wanted. But you nevertheless had this image presented to the world of this frail little nothing man here being brutalized by the British, look at this guy. This guy is not a threat. What is he doing? He's making his own cotton yarn. This was illegal in British India. The British had a monopoly on the production of cotton. You could not make your own. That was not allowed. So if the British come and arrest him, imagine arresting this guy. You look like a fool. You look like a brutalizer if you arrest this guy. And if he doesn't come along quietly, he's not fighting you. He just won't help you. So you're going to have to drag him to his feet. You're going to have to drag him to the car. And this is something what you see sometimes with these protests now, where it's they'll sit in the road and they'll block all traffic. Now, that's highly illegal. They're all going to get arrested. And the issue Gandhi never said, don't arrest me. These laws are unjust. He said, I will comply with your authority by not fighting back, but I will refuse to honor your law. So I will continue to do these things because you have no moral right to have charge of me. But likewise, you don't have the moral right to brutalize me and my country. I don't think I have the moral right to fight you. So I'm going to stay here and peacefully ignore your rules. If you choose to brutalize me, then the world will see you brutalize me. And that's what his genius was. Like a true sacrifice to his cause. Insofar as he was willing to let himself become, in this case literally, the sacrificial lamb of the cause of Indian independence. But again, he's not alone. There are some other fellows here. There is a guy whose name is always very hard to remember, but for some reason it's very easy for me to say it. Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru. All right, that's him. He matters a lot too. He's number 2 of these 3 leading men of Indian independence. Jawaharlal Nehru was the first leader of the Indian National Congress. And he was an advocate early on, especially of resistance. Do not let the British bully you. Do not let the British brutalize you. He was an advocate. I'll move it up so you can see his face. He was an advocate of resistance, okay? Like Gandhi, he was a trained lawyer. You'll notice the pattern here. And he called even as early as 1930-ish for complete independence from Britain. It wasn't like, let's have reforms and so on. Complete independence. They were the leading voice in Indian politics among Indians, especially Hindu Indians, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the difference between Hindus and Muslims here. But Hindu Indians especially, which is the vast majority of the population. He is the leading voice. He is the one that says, we need independence, we need independence, we need independence. When the British need to negotiate with somebody for support, they go to him. Now, Gandhi actually supported the idea of helping the British through World War I. Like, that's how much Gandhi thought this made sense. Like, he felt like even though the British were somebody who needed to go, helping the British in this war would be to India's benefit ultimately, because he believed this idea of there's going to be a promise of more reforms. And Nehru was persuaded to, as a result, join in on that logic. In the end, the British do not give it up easily. And so there is a series of brutal revolts. And eventually there is physical violent resistance in India against the British post-World War II. That even with Gandhi being peaceful and him having us following people who are peaceful, Gandhi himself does not engage in violence. Many Indians do. And eventually the British decide they are going to leave. In the process of turning over power, the power is going to go to the Indian National Congress, and this guy is going to become the first leader of India. Why not Gandhi? Gandhi ain't going to make it. Gandhi's going to get shot. He's actually going to get shot by one of the Hindus of India who thought Gandhi was too nice to Muslims. Because Gandhi was a Hindu, but he was a Hindu who felt like there needed to be an India for everybody. It should not be split up, an India for everybody. Well, why would you split it up? Well, the truth is there was another guy here, and his name was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. You cannot mistake him as Muhammad Ali the boxer. It's not the same man. Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the leader of a thing called the Muslim League, which was the Muslim equivalent of the Indian National Congress. And what Jinnah wanted was a nation carved out of India that was for Muslims. His fear was justified. He felt like, listen, Muslims are a minority in India. But in the past, Muslims had ruled Hindus via the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughals. These were all Muslims. He felt that in a truly democratic India, with a massive Hindu majority, that policies would be created that would inevitably be anti-Muslim. And so his fear was, in a place where they would forever be the minority, they needed their own nation. So it's another nationalist movement. So just like the Indian National Congress is a nationalist movement for India, Muhammad Ali Jinnah led a Muslim League, which was a national movement for a Muslim portion of India. In the end, the British agree with this. And so they split India up. This was a massive mistake, and this is where we're going to end tonight. This is what they did. Hold on. No. Hang on. 'Cause, 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 is a big article. Jesus God, it's a huge article. This is the problem when dealing with Wikipedia. Everything is too much. Okay. All right. Annoying. Hold on. Here's the problem. This is what happens. Ali Jinnah is able to convince the British that this is the right way to go. So the British create two Muslim territories. One in the west, one in the east. They call the west one West Pakistan and the east one East Pakistan. And the idea is pretty straightforward, and the map demonstrates it very well. Any Muslim living on the India side of that new border, the border is called the Radcliffe Line because it was literally drawn by a guy named Radcliffe, who did this in a haphazard way. If you remember the Anthony Bourdain video we watched on India earlier in the year, they went to the border and they talked about how this line was just drawn right through houses. Like, entire houses were split in half, technically speaking. It was a very haphazard line, drawn where, hey, these are mostly Muslims, hey, these are mostly Hindus, there's the line. And so the Muslims are essentially forced to leave India and go to Pakistan. If you are a Hindu living in this new territory of Pakistan, you are effectively forced to pick up and go to India. So, as you might imagine, being forced to pick up your house, uproot everything, and leave. Not leave with a, hey, we have a new home for you over here. It's literally leave. Get the F out. And you can't take your most prized stuff with you. You know, your house, whatever, your actual physical large assets. That's not going with you. And so whether it was by train or by wagon or by foot, millions of people were forced to change these borders. And as this happened, as you might imagine, if I'm a Hindu and I've been uprooted from my home because some Muslim now says this is their country, or if I'm a Muslim and I've been uprooted from my home because some Hindu now says you have a new country, get the hell out, I will absolutely be mad. And I will be mad at the other side. So when Muslims are coming one way and Hindus are coming the other, fighting is inevitable. And there is a lot of conflict. It is a bloodbath. The partition of India, as this is known, leads to considerable death. It doesn't ever really solve anything, and it certainly didn't create a peace. Instead, what it did, it create eternal strife. So now, today, Pakistan is only Pakistan, because East Pakistan becomes the nation of Bangladesh in 1971. So West Pakistan is now the only Pakistan, so it's just called Pakistan. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. India has nuclear weapons. They have them pointed at each other. Tensions between these two nations today are still very, very high, particularly over the region of Kashmir in the north there. You see it in gray. Kashmir is a disputed territory. India says it's theirs. The Pakistani government says it's theirs. And as you saw from that Bourdain video, that border stuff where they're all doing this big fancy ceremony about closing the border, that reflects the tensions here. So these people do not get along. There are large-scale tensions between the two cultures, and they persist to this day. Muhammad Ali Jinnah will rule India until the Pakistan as the head of its government until his retirement. He's not like a king or anything. He's just the head of the elected government. Jawaharlal Nehru will rule India until his retirement and death. His daughter will actually take over. She's a pretty crap ruler. Her name was, Jesus. Why is it slipping my mind? What is her name? Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi. So Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. Not you, dude. That's the new guy. Indira. She gets assassinated. Here she is. Now, why is her name Gandhi if she's the daughter of Nehru? She took the name Gandhi as a respect of sort of the late Mohandas Gandhi, who did not survive. Gandhi, as I said, will end on this, was murdered by a Hindu who thought he was too nice to the Muslims. He was murdered by his own. He was killed, which is, like I said, he actually truly died for his cause. Like, that was the case. Gandhi is a world-renowned figure. He is universally loved and praised historically. There are certainly people who try to put out hit pieces about him, about, he had, mistresses and whatever. Yeah, sure, everybody's human with a million flaws, but not everybody has accomplished anywhere near anything as great as him. Martin Luther King Jr. absolutely in America. Um, he modeled his protest and his civil rights movement that he was spearheading on the work of Gandhi in India during the British Raj. It was highly effective, and it was effective in America as well. So there's a lot more to say, I suppose, but the truth is that's kind of modern India. Modern India is what it is today. It is a growing state. It is about seventh in the world in overall wealth. It is a developing country that's further along than most other places, but that would largely be the history of India and its still rival Pakistan. They still don't like each other. They still have a lot of conflict. You do have a pretty sizable number of Pakistani students in Sharm, whether or not you know it, but they are there. And not that they live this conflict, they live in America, but that conflict is in fact quite real. All right, so that's about an hour. I'm pretty done, so I'm going to cut it right there. Thursday, we will do the same kind of talk with South Africa and its human rights leader, Nelson Mandela, who is not Gandhi. This is a man very willing to blow stuff up to get freedom. And you're going to see a contrasting sort of a conversation there. And again, we'll draw back to the Gaza-Israeli conflict in terms of, are there comparisons to be made between Israel and Gaza versus, say, what happened in South Africa. Some people say there is. Some people say that's an extreme comparison. I'll let you decide, but I'll lay the cards out on the table, and you can think about it however you wish, okay? So I'm done there. I understand that people wanted to make sure that this is recording. I don't know what would make it record or not record. I'm going to be honest with you. Live chat replay is on. No, I don't want that. Live reaction is, I don't know. I have to check. I mean, the last time I was told it didn't post. And yet, I'm just looking it through over here to my settings. And yet the first time it did post. So I don't know why. I'm hoping this will just post to my channel. I don't know why the last time it didn't, but I'm hoping this will. Anyway, that's the best I got. Hopefully it does post. If it doesn't post, it doesn't post. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you in class tomorrow. Peace.